Major funding for this event has been provided by the Walton Family Foundation. The Walton Family Foundation believes those who are closest to a challenge are often closest to its solution. Fishing communities, businesses, environmental advocates, and everyone who eats seafood all benefit from a healthy ocean. Together, we can support solutions that make sustainable seafood one of the conservation success stories of the 21st century. Learn more about opportunities for nature and people to thrive together at www.waltonfamilyfoundation.org. Funding for this program is provided by
Hello and welcome to Tipping Point, Fisheries on the Brink. It is June 8th, World Oceans Day 2022. We are live on the historic waterfront of America's oldest fishing port, Gloucester, Massachusetts, first colonized by the British 399 years ago, and today still a working waterfront with a vibrant, albeit diminished fleet of fishers. I'm Miles O'Brien, science correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and your captain for this next hour or so as we angle for some answers to some urgent, thorny issues. All of them lead to an existential question. What can we do, what must we do to preserve and yet also harvest ocean fisheries in a way that is sustainable? We will shed light on the scourge of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, the challenges of policing the global fishing industry. We will show you new technology to trace fish from the net to your plate. We'll take a fresh look at aquaculture. It's not your father's fish farm, but does it pass the sustainability test? And we will give you some ideas of how to buy and eat seafood responsibly. Chef Danielle Leone will be cooking up a fine, sustainable, traceable seafood feast right here on the Maritime Gloucester dock. I wish you could be here for the tasting. Throughout this webcast, we hope to be hearing from all of you. So please join the conversation. Share your thoughts on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you are, whatever platform you're watching on. Our team will reel in the keepers for me, and we will get them in the mix. But first, let's work up a head of steam and start plying some challenging waters. The ocean is vast, seemingly limitless.
People tend to have a sense of its indestructibility, not its fragility.
John Kerry is the special presidential envoy for climate. He spoke with me at the State Department.
In fact, the ocean is an ecosystem. It's a system. And every part of that eco-environment depends on other parts, all the way up and down the food chain.
All over the world, humans treat the ocean as a bottomless dump site, filling it with plastics, sewage, chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides.
There's a dead zone around the Gulf. There are now something like 500 of those dead zones all around the world, where the excess of nitrates coming from the agricultural practice is going into the water.
And what about the fish in the sea? The world's appetite for seafood is skyrocketing, along with the population. In the past 30 years, global fish consumption rose by more than 120%. But most of that demand was met by aquaculture, which increased more than 520% in the same period. The UN estimates the amount of wild-caught fish has risen by all of 14%. Daniel Pauly is a professor of fisheries at the University of British Columbia.
It's actually not surprising that animal life in the ocean is declining because we are throwing at it our whole industrial might. The biggest boat that we have, bigger than some warships. And this is appropriate because we are conducting a war against fish.
A war against fish? The analogy may be apt. It is a tragedy of the commons, where individual greed subverts the societal good.
There are massive fleets of fishing boats, 3,000 or so, that are plying the high seas of the ocean. They strip mine that area, pile the fish into the boat, and they send it back to various countries for people to consume. So there's far too much money chasing too few fish. And that's putting pressure on the ocean.
And many countries heavily subsidize the behavior.
The message that nature gives you is, I cannot produce more fish for you, leave me alone. That's what nature tells you. But you don't have to listen. Why? Because the government gives you money to run the fishery, continue running the fishery. When the catch declines, you should fish less and the catch would increase.
Where there are regulations on fishing, fisheries do remain sustainable, but they are diminishing. In 1990, 10% of the world's fisheries were considered overfished. Today, 58% of the world's fish stocks are being fished at or beyond sustainable levels. We need to find a way to sustainably harvest food from the ocean. Can that be done with the press of population and demand?
Yes, but it takes discipline. It takes rules and regulations you all agree upon. And it takes enforcement of those rules. And that hasn't happened.
How do you make it happen?
Diplomacy, leadership. You have to step up. Citizens are going to demand this. And it's not going to do you any good to have this resource where you have so much of our food, our protein being produced, and have it so disrespected that it's a diminishing amount.
A diminishing amount of fish versus an ever-increasing population. It's a subject our first guest has written about quite extensively. Among his books, American Catch, The Fight for Our Local Seafood, The Omega Principles, Seafood and the Quest for a Long Life and a Healthier Planet, and the bestseller, For Fish, The Future of the Last Wild Food. Journalist and author Paul Greenberg, great to have you with us on the program. First of all, let's do a definition.
Good
when
idea.
I say overfishing, what do we mean by that?
Plain and simple, it's just that we are taking more fish out of a given population of fish than can be replaced in a given time period. So it's a little bit like your bank account, right? So if you have a big chunk of money in there, it's generating interest. Generally, you just want to spend the interest, not the capital. When you get into an overfish situation, though, you're digging into the capital so that the interest every year is less and less, and pretty soon there's no interest at all.
Farmers would call that the seed corn, I guess,
The seed
right?
corn of fishing, yes.
Yeah. All right, so the U.S. controls more oceans than any country in the world, and yet I think a lot of people out there might be surprised to learn that we import upwards of 90% of our seafood.
Yep.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of it has to do with labor. We don't seem to want to process our own fish, to deal with our own fish. A huge part of it actually has to do with aquaculture. In this country, very little aquaculture is done. A huge amount of, say, the shrimp and the salmon, which are number 1 and 2 of the seafoods that we eat, is aquacultured and is grown abroad. People don't want to see fish farms in their backyards, so that's a major part of it. So I would say the combination of labor and aquaculture.
So a little bit of NIMBY there.
Yes.
China has 66 million metric tons of aquaculture product that comes out every year.
Yes.
The U.S. is number 17th behind North Korea and Myanmar.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people might be surprised by that. Is that something that perhaps should be changed?
You know, I don't think that we should be such a huge importer of seafood. I think that we do actually have the know-how and the environmental controls in place to possibly produce more sustainable aquaculture on our shores. And frankly, right now, it's just a numbers game. We're just doing it because it's cheaper and also because we're trying, we don't have the regulations in place for us to have our own aquaculture industry.
We do have the regulations in place to have an extremely viable fishery generally in the United States. Does that have something to do with it? I mean, the wild fisheries are better off here?
Yeah, I mean, so the United States over the course of the last 50 years has really done tremendously well in improving our wild fisheries policies. So we've gotten to the point where overfishing, not completely eliminated in our waters, but greatly, greatly reduced. We've rebuilt a number of different fishes all around the country. So the fishing industry, the wild fish industry, doesn't take too kindly to the emergence of a farmed fish industry. So there's a fair amount of pushback coming from the wild fish industry, not wanting to see aquaculture compete with it.
Now, the farm fish industry is a relatively new industry, 30 plus years old, more or less. I mean, I know there's ancient versions of this, but in the early days, there were many concerns about the environmental possibilities, escaped fish with genetic mutations, fish that had high levels of PCBs, for example, from the feed. How much has the industry rectified that?
Well, in the early days of salmon farming, for example, it could take as many as 6 pounds of wild fish to grow 1 pound of farmed salmon. So it's a pretty not very good trade. Over the course of the last 20 years, I would say the industry has reduced the amount of wild fish in the feed and has added in agricultural products instead. So in that sense, it's improved. We've gotten better at siting aquaculture farms. Early days, we crammed a lot of net pens into these very narrow inlets and stuff. And so you get nitrification, eutrophication of these bays and inlets. That still happens, but it's gotten better. Is it at what I would call sustainable and acceptable levels? For me, I'd like to see the industry get better.
So, farm salmon is perhaps a solution to feed a lot of people, or perhaps not. It's quite debatable, isn't it?
Yeah.
When the industry says we're part of the solution to feed the planet, should we hang on to our wallets?
I think that if you look at the price point, say, of farm salmon, you're talking $7, $8, $10, $15 a pound, depending on when you're going. That is not a feed the world type solution. I think, though, there are some aquaculture products out there that could potentially do a lot to feed the world. Things like kelp, things like mussels, clams, oysters. Those are all super low carbon inputs to come to market, and also very inexpensive. So potentially, yes, with aquaculture, but I don't think farm salmon is going to feed the world.
All right, the questions are already coming in, and
Yes.
we're glad of that. Please keep them coming. Kim from North Carolina has this. It seems the wealthier you are, the better you are able to eat fish, which is good for your diet. We won't disagree on that. I'm wondering if the world's fisheries are going to turn into a luxury protein.
I mean, it's already happening to some degree. 1 billion people do depend on fish as their primary source of protein, but we are seeing situations in West Africa where vast amounts of high-quality fish have been basically stolen from these nations and brought over to Western countries for their own consumption. And there it goes right now, flying over us
Right there.
as we speak.
The
50
Coast Guard.
pounds of fresh grouper.
We should tell you that Tommy Lee Jones is filming a movie offshore here, and
Yes.
the crew is going back and forth on a Coast Guard chopper. So we apologize for that, but we're going to press on and talk about
Yeah.
fisheries. The fisheries in the U.S. are well managed, but a lot of the reason for that stems from what happened here in the 90s. There was a kind of an epic collapse of the fisheries here. How bad was it then, and how much better is it now as a result of all that?
Well, we did see these massive cod collapses, and that was the poor man's fish, and that we saw these all throughout the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And we did see these massive fishery collapses. However, right now in Gloucester, huge runs of haddock, similar fish to a cod, doing really well, precisely because we've employed these really good management techniques, and we've gotten to the point where we've rebuilt a number of fish stocks. Now, are we back to the king cod that made the famous golden cod hanging in the Boston State Houses? Are we back to those days? I would say no, but we do have lots of bright spots in the American fisheries portfolio.
Isn't there some literature where people talked about walking across the water on the cod, that kind of thing?
There are fish stories out there for sure.
Yeah.
But there were definitely historical abundances that we will never see in our lifetimes again.
All right, let's talk about the climate here. You've got regulations. By their definition, they have to have a specific nature to them. As the climate changes, are the regulations flexible enough?
I would argue not. I mean, the fish are on the move. We are starting to see fish coming up from southern waters that have never been here before. There are no real quotas for them yet in place, or not acceptable quotas yet. So fisheries management is going to have to be a lot more dynamic as the waters warm.
So, you write very eloquently about, your childhood and fishing and what that meant to you.
Yeah.
So just in the course of your lifetime, though, you've seen some significant change, haven't you?
Very much so. So I grew up on Long Island Sound, and I would say over the course of my lifetime, the fish that you would find in Long Island Sound has changed to the point where the portfolio of fish in Long Island Sound is a lot more like the Chesapeake Bay. So we used to have winter flounder, we used to have tomcod, and all those kinds of wintry fish in Long Island Sound. Now we have summer flounder, now we have black sea bass, all these what we traditionally considered mid-Atlantic fish in our waters, and those other fish have disappeared almost entirely.
So the Chesapeake Bay is coming here, I guess, in a way, right?
It could be, or maybe the Gulf of Maine is going to become Long Island Sound. Maybe there's a sort of relay race going on as we get warmer and warmer.
Paul, that was great. You're not done. We're going to bring you back at the end to answer a few more questions. But right now, we have a special treat for you. Danielle Leone, acclaimed American chef who is focused on sustainability. James Beard, the full thing, has been cooking up a feast. We're just going to get a little sample, a little hors d'oeuvre to begin the evening. Danielle, what have you brought us for us?
I made you all a wild herring pate, the hot pepper jam, and a little sharp cheese. I love this because it's a canned herring and it's sustainable, it's certified, and super tasty.
All right, we're going to try it.
Bon appetit.
Right, cheers, guys.
Delicious.
Yeah, sustainability can taste so good, right?
Shouldn't talk with my mouth full, but that is delicious.
Thanks.
You fill my East European heart.
I got to tell you, I wouldn't have guessed that for canned herring. That's really fabulous. Okay, you're off to a great start, Danielle.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Keep it going over
Thanks.
there. We'll check in with you a little later. All right, a little more about the climate crisis now. The oceans cover 70% of our planet. We literally would not be here without them. And they are intertwined with the climate, each affecting the other. As the water gets warmer, it expands and melts glaciers. That causes sea level to rise. And the increased surface water temperatures are changing ocean currents as well. That includes the circulation in the North Atlantic, right where we are. It means the water here in the Gulf of Maine is warming 3 times faster than the global average. The ocean is changing fast, and not for the better. You don't have to look very far or dive very deep to see the signs of trouble. Coral reefs, fragile, complex, and finicky about temperature, are dying all over the world. On average, global ocean temperatures have risen 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, since the advent of the Industrial Revolution. This is a big problem for fish.
Ocean animals, especially fish and many invertebrates, can tolerate only a relatively narrow range of temperatures.
Evolutionary biologist Malin Pinsky is an associate professor at Rutgers University.
When ocean water heats up, their heart rate goes up, their metabolism goes up, and they require more oxygen as well.
And even as they need more, there is less of it. As temperature rises, increasing amounts of oxygen in seawater become gaseous. This is what makes a pot of water bubble as it boils. It's a deadly conundrum, and it is prompting marine life to move to cooler water. Most notably, the temperature-sensitive American lobster, the most lucrative fishery in the US and Canada. In the past 30 years, lobster fisheries from Virginia to Long Island Sound all but disappeared. Oceanographer Andrew Pershing is the lead scientist at Climate Central.
It's really an extraordinary change that's happened really quickly in this region. And so now we're trying to watch how the system responds. We're trying to figure out what does it mean for us and how we make decisions about the ocean.
Rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere mean more in the oceans as well. Ocean acidity is up 30% since the Industrial Revolution. This makes it harder for oysters, clams, scallops, and the like to build their shells. Thinner shells mean less growth and increased death rates. Local currents are surfacing this issue in the Pacific Northwest right now.
They've led to failures of baby oysters in farms in some cases. And that's really led a lot of research and also required a lot of adaptation for many oyster farms and how they raise their oysters.
What is happening to the oceans is not unprecedented. 250 million years ago, during the Permian extinction, a huge influx of carbon dioxide from volcanic eruptions snuffed out 95% of marine and 70% of terrestrial species.
The Permian became, and has been for some time, a kind of go-to natural experiment in the history of Earth to show us what might happen if you rapidly warm the oceans and acidify them and deplete them of oxygen.
Curtis Deutsch is a professor of geoscience at Princeton University. He compared fossil records to the present day and built a model to predict outcomes as the climate crisis worsens. Left unchecked, what happens?
And if it continues till the end of this century, we're looking at something like 10% of all marine species we would project to go extinct. By a year like 2300, warming could reach something like well over 5 degrees Celsius, approaching 10 degrees Celsius. By that point, we're starting to project something like a third of marine species to go extinct.
Well, that certainly is the worst case scenario. But Curtis Deutsch says if we manage to keep warming to less than 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial era, That would be the Paris Agreement, essentially. We might lose a few species, but can avoid a mass extinction of marine life. This is something to strive for, to be sure, as I'm sure our next guest will agree. She is a research scientist at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. She studies ecosystem change and fish ecosystem relationships in the Gulf of Maine and the Northeast U.S. Welcome, Kathy Mills, to Tipping Point. Good to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me.
So what's going on in the Gulf of Maine? Why is it such a warming hotspot?
Well, as you said, the Gulf of Maine has been warming about 3 times faster than oceans around the world. And in the past decade, we've been experiencing frequent marine heat waves, which are temperature conditions that exceed those that we've experienced historically. And this warming is partly related to the global phenomenon of oceans around the world absorbing atmospheric heat that's been created as we emit greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So we've actually benefited on land from the oceans buffering some of the heating that we would have experienced otherwise, but that means they are warming up. And in the Gulf of Maine, that warming has been exacerbated by a shift in the Gulf Stream current, which brings warm waters up along the east coast of the U.S. And that current's now pushing further north and west, bringing more warm water into the Gulf of Maine. So we're essentially now in a living laboratory that's changing extremely rapidly, where we're seeing changes across the ecosystem as a result of this warming.
So a moment ago, I was kind of joking with Paul about the Chesapeake Bay on its way here, but maybe that isn't such a joke. Is the Mid-Atlantic on its way here?
Yeah, if we look at the climate projections out, say, to mid-century, we do expect the waters in the Gulf of Maine to feel more like those of Rhode Island now. And we expect that the ecosystem will adjust to this warmer state. And so species will shift, and we will see species that are adapted to warmer waters in this region more frequently. And then activities that are pursued in the oceans will also be affected.
Okay, let's talk about lobsters. We are talking about Maine after all. Lobsters are in the midst of an epic run right now. They're quite plentiful, and lobster fisher people are doing very well. What's going on there?
So lobsters in the Gulf of Maine have actually benefited from the warming we've experienced over the past decade or so. Temperatures have just warmed up into a really sweet spot that supports high productivity for the lobster population in this region. And I would add that the productivity of the population has also been further enhanced by really strong conservation measures that have been put in place for decades and were initially led by the industry to protect egg-bearing lobsters and large lobsters as well. So those two attributes coupled together have really created a large population of lobsters and a lot of resilience in that population. And certainly as temperatures continue to warm, we do expect conditions to change, and so lobsters could be impacted. But as we look out toward the middle of the century, given the conditions we expect then, we do expect to still have a sustainable, viable lobster fishery in the state of Maine. Its timing might shift. We're seeing the season start earlier and run longer through the course of the year, and the location may shift. So we may have the fishery more concentrated in mid-coast and down east Maine, but we do expect it to remain a viable industry that's contributing to a lot of coastal communities and rural populations in Maine.
So don't take it off the license plate just yet.
Exactly. Actually, our projections indicate that the stock might look more like it did in the early 2000s, and we definitely had lobster license plates then.
All right. What about the other fisheries that are, I mean, obviously lobsters are the most lucrative fishery in the U.S. and Canada, but there are a lot of other fisheries to contend with. What's happening with them?
Well, we have certainly seen declines in some of our fisheries. Northern shrimp is one example of a fishery that used to support winter fishing in the Gulf of Maine. And so northern shrimp really experienced a major decline with the 2012 heat wave, which was the first heat wave we experienced in the region. And since that time, they just haven't been reproductively successful in the region. So that fishery is no longer really viable, no longer exist. We've also seen declines in Gulf of Maine cod that have been associated with temperature, and that population just isn't as productive under warmer temperature conditions, but we didn't really catch that quickly in the management process, and now it's depleted to a level that's really hard to recover from. So we're looking at long recovery timeframes for that species. And then other species like longfin squid have actually provided new opportunities, and some fisheries that were no longer are successful at pursuing lobster or groundfish have moved into longfin squid, and that's become really lucrative in Rhode Island and the Mid-Atlantic. But we are seeing effects like timing of where squid are is changing, and the rules for that fishery are tied to certain locations and times of harvest. So we're seeing effects that play out in a variety of different ways.
So the fish are adapting to a changing climate. What about the fishers? It's hard to turn on a dime depending on what you're going after, what you're permitted for, what your boat is capable of hauling in, right?
It is definitely hard to turn on a dime, but we are seeing fisheries adapt to these changes. So some of the changes that we see and ways of adapting within the harvest sector are vessels are traveling further to continue tracking species they've historically caught, even as those species shift northward. We're also seeing fishermen move into different fisheries as they see new opportunities arise, and we're seeing diversification of looking for opportunities across multiple fisheries, so some can complement others. As one increases, others might decline, but those might balance out again over time, and diversification into activities outside of fisheries. But it's not only within the harvest sector that we need to see adaptations, so we're also seeing changes that have to play out at the community scale in terms of shoreside infrastructure being available to support the fisheries as they change, and markets also being suitable, whether they're local seafood markets or even global markets that create opportunities for the products that are available and that are different from what they might have looked like in the past. And opportunities exist, but I would recognize that all of these require money. There are costs associated with these types of changes. You may need a new vessel or new gear. There's also knowledge that needs to change. Fishermen have developed certain knowledges for how to fish for certain species, so that needs to, there needs to be new learning in the process, and also just cultural and emotional shifts. Many fishermen have really strong ties to the fisheries they participate in, and so that's an adjustment that needs to be accommodated as well.
Is part of this changing demand, is it convincing people to eat a green crab instead of a red lobster?
Well, I think certainly aligning consumer demand with the species that are available to them is a really important part of the process. Some of the species that may be available in local waters may not have been those species people were familiar with 20 years ago. And so an openness to consuming local seafood over a certain species, I think, is really important. And there will be, creativity in creating market for some products like green crab.
Is this an opportunity for scientists, and for that matter the rest of the world, to catch a glimpse of the future? What's happening here really is our future in a way.
It is, and I think we are, as I mentioned earlier, in a living laboratory. We are living through these changes as they occur. Changes are underway and they will continue. And so we are trying to draw insights and lessons to understand how ecosystems change in the face of warming. We're also trying to understand how people are affected by those changes and develop information that can support decisions that enable people to adapt to those changes and to really think about the oceans they want for the future and create those oceans through the actions that we're taking.
All right, we'll be watching closely, Kathy. A little bit of pressure on you guys, but we'll be watching. All right. Kathy Mills, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
While fisheries may be on the move because of changing water temperatures, in general, here in the United States, they're healthy. The regulations governing fisheries here are as tough as they get, and they are driven by data and science, not politics or special interests. The experts say that's an essential piece of the puzzle for effective fisheries management. In the tug of war between self-interest and fisheries management, it's a big challenge for the fishing industry to set its own rules and police its own behavior.
It is absolutely impossible for the industry, given the shape of the production curve, to self-regulate, because the interest of each individual fisher is totally opposed to the interest of society at large.
Marine biologist Daniel Pauly says the United States offers the best example of strong, effective regulations to avoid depleting fisheries. Enacted in 1976 and amended in 1996 and 2007, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act puts science at the center of policy. When the data shows a fishery is failing regulators must intervene to stop overfishing and rebuild stocks. Malin Pinsky of Rutgers says it works.
Doesn't mean everything is rosy, but in general, fisheries in the U.S. are doing quite well.
So what's the lesson there?
Well, I think one of the lessons from our experience in the United States is with effective governance and agreement among fishers, so you don't have a tragedy of the commons, it can be avoided. What that means is more fish in the water and more fish on our plates.
So how do they know how many fish are in the sea? The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration conducts a series of surveys aimed at creating an accurate fish census. One of them, the biannual Bottom Trawl Survey, began in 1963, making it one of the oldest continuous fish counts in the world. Using modified fishing gear and oceanographic instruments, they aim to take stock of 50 fisheries from North Carolina to Maine.
They drag large nets near the bottom of the ocean and they pull up what they catch, and they count and weigh all the species that are in there. And that information goes into deciding each year how many fish can be caught in different fisheries. But because it's been happening for a half century, it now is an amazing record of where different species have been and where they are now. And what we see is that there have been some really dramatic changes in the ocean.
Malin Pinsky and his team have partnered with NOAA to visualize all those changes in the location of marine species. Google DISMAP, that's D-I-S-M-A-P, and you're just a few clicks away from seeing just what's happened to the U.S. fisheries over the years. It's fascinating. Of course, the fishers make it their business to know all this. Joining me now is one of them. Vito Giacalone is a third-generation fisherman, home port right here in Gloucester. He is policy director for the Northeast Seafood Coalition and president of the Gloucester Fishing Community Preservation Fund. Vito, so glad you could join us here in this beautiful place, and we're thrilled to be in this beautiful port on this wonderful New England summer evening.
Glad to have you, Miles.
All right, so you started fishing in the early 80s, and that was actually kind of the tail end of a reasonably abundant time. You were kind of right before the crash. What was it like then? And how does that compare to what's going on now?
Yeah, so it was late 70s. For 10 years there, it was amazing. And it dropped off around 1986. So for me, it was 8-9 years worth of heyday. And it dropped off pretty quick. But we don't know whether that was an environmental change, because 3 years later, the fish seemed to reappear again. But I was already out of it.
You were out of it, and of course things kind of collapsed, and you were out of it. But you went back into it for a certain period of time. Yep. What led you back into fishing, and what's going on now?
What I did after fishing, I thought was something temporary, and that I would go back. I've got a brother that was in the building business, and we ended up, too committed to that. But I always thought of myself as a fisherman building houses. Even though we did that for 15 years, I never identified with anything other than that. I say my family were fishermen since my grandfather got here at the turn of the century, the last century. So I loved it. It was something I wanted to get back to, and I bought a boat and a license in 1999. 2 years into it, there was a federal lawsuit for policy, and people gathered, and that was the founding of the Northeast Seafood Coalition. And I think my permitting experience and working with government officials and trying to get things permitted, I felt there was a role for me to try to help reconcile and come up with a solution. So that's caused me 20 years of my life now.
So the fleet here, over time, the fleet has gone down quite a bit. It's
unbelievable.
What are the numbers? How many boats are here now?
So we're now in an output-controlled quota type system. There's 24 active boats in the traditional groundfish fishery right now.
More in lobsters, I imagine, right?
Much more, much more in lobsters. In fact, there's been movement from a lot of traditional ground fishermen moved to lobster because of the strict regulations on groundfish. So we went from, in 2010, we were 98 active vessels between the gillnet fishery and the trawl fishery in Gloucester in 2010. And as of now, like I said, it's down to 24.
So is that a right size fleet for Gloucester, and are fishers out there seeing reasonable amounts of fish?
They're seeing records amount of fish. When I say records, what a 40-foot trawler with minor horsepower could catch now, if left to the rules that were in place 20 years ago, they'd catch more fish than a 70-foot trawler could catch on the same bottom. So, there are definitely wonderful amounts of fish. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a great alignment between the stock assessment, stock status projections, and what is actually seen on the water. And recreational and commercial fishermen see that every day.
So you're saying it's underfished?
It is underfished, even with the quotas that are basically a small percentage of what we believe are not even close to the actual size of some of those stocks. Those are the allowable amounts. Our fishery since 2004 has never exceeded an allowable catch, has never overfished a stock beyond our quota on any of the 16 allocated and regulated species. But overfishing occurs in retrospect. So in other words, you're allowed to catch 10, you only catch 7. Instead of a pat on the back, they do a retrospective analysis and say, really, probably should have been 4. So that happens continuously. I'm not being derogatory to the science, I'm just saying it's very difficult to assess these stocks, but regulations are working right to the letter. We're able to stay within our quotas.
Isn't it a success story here, though, when you say there's abundance here now? Some of the fish are relatively abundant. I think overall there's some concern that some are decreasing as well. But overall, it's a fairly healthy fishery after the intervention of some regulation. You would disagree with that?
Slightly, only because there hasn't been enough recognition that there may be another hypothesis that we've underestimated the biomass, and we've caused both a combination of attrition, right, where fishermen are aging out, and 2 generations of fishermen have been discouraged from getting in because their dads have been telling them, rightfully, there's plenty of fish out there, but now they're telling us we can't catch any. And so we've lost fishermen because of what seems to be a doom and gloom, ever depressing regulatory regime.
So let's talk about how the science is derived. And these surveys, the bottom trawl survey is kind of the headliner, but there are other surveys that take place. There's an accounting of the kind of fish, the numbers of fish that are being caught, to get an idea of how much fishers can continue to take.
Sure.
Do you see some problems and discrepancies in the science?
Yes, and I think it's a weakness in the data on they call that the fishery independent data. In other words, the data is not coming from the fishery itself, it's coming independent of the fishery, which is the government sampling. I think they do a great job of biological sampling. It's statistically, in our opinion, it's statistically not valid to use as an interannual estimate of abundance. There's just not enough samples. These stocks are patchy, whether they're in high abundance or low abundance. Caught are always caught in the same 10 or 15% of the overall, but the randomized survey has a higher likelihood of catching where there's never caught, and so you're never going to get the true abundance unless you start to use the fishery dependent data to inform abundance. Right now we haven't done that yet. We're still pushing and participate in all of the meetings. There's a group of scientists now, both at government and NGO, that see that there is value in trying to extract more signals of abundance out of the commercial data, which is a rich amount of data.
There is a longstanding partnership here, and I guess that is key, isn't it, if you're driving towards solutions.
Absolutely.
So let's take a moment. We got to talk about this vessel behind us for just a moment. This is the Adventure. It's a trawler that was built in the 1920s. It's actually the last American dory trawler, and it had a dozen dories along with it, and each dory would have a couple of guys on it, and they would drop out lines with hundreds of hooks on it. Can you imagine what it was like to fish that way back in those days?
I can and can't. I mean, it always amazed me. I mean, I fished on the offshore trawlers here for years, and I used to think of that all the time. We're bringing in 80,000 pounds. These guys used to bring in 200,000, and they were flaking them and salting them and going out in dories, and it's pretty amazing. Really admired what they did.
Well, as time goes on, the technology does change and the fish change, and being a part of that can be painful. And I imagine there's a lot of angst and pain as you see a way of life kind of changing here.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, the most modern trawler that we have here was built in 1979. We have newer boats, but they employ the same old methods. So we haven't really advanced much in the last 50 years. It's not that you mentioned trawler. That was a tub trawler, right, where they went out and set long line trawls. I'm talking about the bottom trawling.
Right.
Is what we do. That really hasn't improved much in the last 50 years. So if we're fishing, we got about 8% of the effort occurring today. So it's, you know, if you eat a U.S. fishery, eat from a U.S. fishery, you're getting sustainably caught.
You know it's caught the right way, right?
Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
Vito Cioccoloni, thank you so much for being here with us
Thank
at
you for having
Gloucester.
me, Miles.
And I am smelling something delicious here right now. Danielle Leone, James Beard chef, and sustainable seafood expert, is hard at work cooking up this amazing seafood feast. Vito, I hope you can stay for a tasting here. Sure. We already had a little sampling of the canned herring pate. It was fabulous. Go check that out if you can. And we're going to go over there in a little while, and I wish you all could taste this, but it's going to be fun. So Danielle, keep hard at it. As Vito mentioned, there are plenty of fleets and plenty of nations where the fisheries are either poorly managed or not at all. And in some cases, the rule of international law is flagrantly ignored. It is an ugly enterprise that leads to decimation and death, and it is very hard to police this bad behavior. Mostly, they are invisible crimes, but occasionally we get a glimpse of illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. This footage was shot by the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, a nonprofit activist organization that plies the world's oceans, targeting pirate fishing boats. Sea Shepherd often brings troops from nearby nations to board and make arrests.
If we're serious about dealing with the issue of overfishing, one of the biggest problems facing the world's oceans, then surely we need to start with eliminating illegal fishing, a big component of the overfishing problem, and one where we already have the laws on our place.
Peter Hammerstedt is director of campaigns for Sea Shepherd. Many illegal fishing boats use banned drift nets to indiscriminately wipe out huge swaths of marine life. Is there any way to know how big this problem is?
Lots of people have tried.
Susan Jackson is president of the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation, or ISSF, a nonprofit funded by tuna processors and foundations.
I think it's unreported and unregulated, so it is by definition very difficult, if not impossible, to quantify.
The most recent study draws on data from 2003 and estimates between 11 and 19% of reported catches are illegal. No one really knows accurate current numbers, but the incentive to ignore the law is growing as the fish become more scarce. What kind of leverage can the U.S. put into play to stop this kind of fishing?
There's not enough enforcement, unfortunately. The problem is there are different layers of protection. And in point of fact, a very low percentage of those areas are really policed, are genuinely monitored. So we must achieve much greater monitoring of our fisheries and much greater enforcement in order to preserve what we know we must preserve.
But the bad actors are clever. They deploy giant factory ships with huge refrigerated holds, so-called reefers. Small vessels cross into the exclusive economic zones of other countries to do the illicit catching, often using slave labor.
And it is mixed with legitimately caught fish. So you have well-managed fish caught by people who are honestly paid, mixed with fish that is caught by slaves and caught illegally. So this fish get mixed, and there is no way to sort it out.
Or maybe there is. Satellite tracking technology can allow authorities to look over the horizon. And the 25 tuna companies that are a part of ISSF are tracing fish from catch to can. It's an idea that began as a way to limit losses during a food recall, but now growing concern about illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing has given it new purpose and momentum.
Chain of custody and traceability is critically important for the credibility of any environmental claims that are made. And if you don't have that ability, then anything else that you're saying is good, you can't really prove it. It is completely unknown.
So, what is the best way to prove where seafood comes from? Are there techniques that can make traceability something that is not just an option, or for that matter, a chore? In short, can the effort to trace seafood be a feature that everyone expects and demands all along the value chain? Joining me to discuss this are two people who know an awful lot about this. Greg Brown is Executive Director at the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, and David Shore, the Senior Manager of Transparent Seas at World Wildlife Fund. Greg, let's start with you. Sure. If you don't have traceability, can you have sustainability?
You can have sustainability, but traceability is the foundation of sustainability. The way you exemplify sustainability is by having the evidences to show that sustainability, you're meeting those objectives, and traceability is the underpinning of that.
All right, help a landlubber understand how you trace a fish to my plate. How is that even possible?
You can do it through batch and lot traceability. Basically, everybody along the supply chain knows who they've bought the fish from and who they're selling it to, and all you have to do is record that data and then transfer that data across each step of the supply chain.
A lot of this data historically was actually captured, and mostly it's on paper, right?
Yes, mostly it's on paper now, but the trick is to get it into a software that can be interchangeable and can move the data along through the different stages of the supply chain so it becomes interoperable.
Well, more on that in a sec, but first, David, I want to ask you about traceability in seafood. This is an industry that is kind of opaque, to say the least. It's hard to understand what's going on, isn't it?
It definitely is, Miles. You know, this is the last great hunter-gatherer activity of the human species on a massive scale. And when we buy fish, it comes from the most complex, diffuse supply chains of almost anything that we consume. The fish that we eat, it could come out of the water from right here. It could come from Peru. It could come from Antarctica. It could come from the Bering Sea. It could come from all over the 7 seas. It might be fished by a factory ship that is huge, that's employing helicopters, radar, computers, or it might come out of a guy who's fishing with a hand line out of something not much bigger than a canoe. It might come to you direct by truck from the dock to your restaurant. It might come through a supply chain that involves half a dozen steps of processing and trade in any number of countries. So this kind of complexity is a real challenge for the people who are selling you fish.
So, Greg, what is the incentive to inject traceability into that system?
Well, there's a lot of good incentive for it. There's brand protection, there's supply chain transparency that allows you to become more efficient, to mitigate, for example, the disruptions that we found in the COVID period with supply chain issues. There's just a lot of incentives right away, right across the seafood sector.
Of course, the bad guys, you know, the mafia, they don't like traceability, right? So how do you get at that?
Well, the vast majority of the seafood industry is not mafia. The vast majority are fishermen trying to do their work, aquaculturists trying to grow their product, and all of them trying to get it to market. The bad actors actually are the ones who are scared of the traceability because that's what impedes them from getting it to the most lucrative market sources. But the good actors, that's the traceability that helps them bring their fish to market and sell it at a better price.
The bad actors with these big boats, these factory boats, we know a little bit about that. But what about the guy in the canoe who's out there kind of subsistence fishing? Does he or she want traceability?
You know, the small operators often have as much of a motive or even more of a motive than some of the big operators. Not because the big operators are all bad. They're a mixed bag also. So I wouldn't paint them with a totally tarred brush. But the small guys, they get extra benefits from traceability. They get more visibility in the marketplace. They get access to markets that they might not already otherwise have. And in many places, they also get a kind of protection. The visibility that they have protects them, for example, in some countries from corruption, which is unfortunately still a real problem. More to the point, a lot of those fishermen are now involved in real efforts to do community-based management, and they want visibility for the good stuff they're doing. Traceability allows us to not only to disconnect people from illegal fishing, but to connect them to fisheries improvement projects, which are basically projects taking place in dozens of countries where fishermen are trying to get it right.
Let me ask you this, Greg. Is this something that rules or laws can fix or change? Is this something that is by edict, or does there have to be sort of an organic demand out of the industry? Do there have to be other incentives, in other words?
So the incentives of rules and laws are, of course, of incredible importance, and the regulatory environment is demanding more and more now that traceability be there, and that we can use that traceability to make sure we prevent IUU fishing coming into the supply chain. But it won't happen just by rules or laws. The seafood industry needs to engage. Every step of the seafood industry, from the first mile to the last mile, needs to engage to create the environment where the rules and laws are effective.
Okay, I'm imagining this guy in the canoe, this man or woman in the canoe, David, and how are they going to do this better? Yeah, I know you've thought a lot about this. You have an app in mind. Explain what the general idea is here. I mean, if we're still using slips of paper to try to track this in this world of big data and cloud resources, can we make this more robust and digital?
Yeah, we definitely can. The good news is that the technology is no longer the rate limiting factor, right? We have apps that have been written for smartphones. We even have apps that have been written for regular flip phones where you use basic texting technology. And a fisherman or the first person to buy the fish on the dock, they can use these apps right where they are to put in the basic information, like where was the fish caught, who caught it, when, using what gear. But these apps can also, particularly the smartphone apps, can connect to more sophisticated stuff. You mentioned satellite monitoring. You can connect these to GPS systems that will automatically record where the fishing took place. You can record them to specialized satellite systems that are there for fisheries. So we have now technologies that can be used at the smallest scale, and just about everybody out there has a mobile phone. The trick now is to make sure that all these apps can talk to each other and talk to you as a buyer or a consumer, and that's where the GDST traceability comes in.
It's bound to add cost, and consumers may say they want this, but they may not always reward the good players, right?
Well, so consumers are interested in sustainability, and in fact, they're interested in traceability. There are recent studies that show something like 92% of consumers just assume that the fish they're getting is going to be fully traceable and legal, right? So there's a lot of demand there, but we also know that consumers really are influenced by price, by convenience, even the best intentions. So the work that we're doing with the supply chain is to try to make sure that consumers are really only given sustainable choices, or at least choices of fish that are on the way to sustainability. And to do that, we really need to take this traceability idea from a small niche idea to something that the whole industry is doing.
Greg, do you think consumers are changing on this?
Yeah, I think consumers trust the marketplaces and the places where they go to buy their product. They trust the stores, they trust those stewards of that fish to have done their work and to present it to them. Nobody goes into a market looking for IUU fish, that's the responsibility of those brands. That's the responsibility that the consumers invest in them, and the brands are making progress towards that, and the seafood supply chain's making progress.
What happens if we don't do this?
If we don't do it, I think the regulatory environment will do it for us. And we need to be ready as a seafood industry to meet that regulatory requirement and to be ahead of it and to get it done and be ready for it when it comes. And I don't think there's an option to not do it.
David and Greg, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Miles.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
To what extent can fish farming take pressure off of wild fisheries that are under siege? It seems like a simple question, but it is actually really complex. Aquaculture that produces mussels, oysters, and even seaweed shows a lot of promise, but farm fish, primarily salmon, might be creating more demand for other species of wild-caught fish to feed the fish. This is the largest fishery in the world, Peruvian anchovies. Fishers catch about 5 million pounds of them each year. But very few of the strong-flavored fish are eaten directly by humans. Most of them are ground up and fed to other fish. Farm salmon, primarily, the finned star of the aquaculture industry. Andrew Swanson is with Cook Aquaculture in Nova Scotia.
You know, terrestrial systems are tapped out. So we do need to look at the oceans as another reservoir and opportunity to grow what is now a continually growing population. And there is an understanding that we need to find new sources of protein.
Aquaculture now produces half of the world's supply of seafood, but the industry must grapple with a series of problems that can affect the fish and their surroundings. Cook says it has hardened its enclosures to better keep the fish captive, never uses prophylactic antibiotics, and deploys lumpfish to eat the sea lice that can infect farm salmon. And Cook says feeding involves a combination of automation and remote monitoring aimed at providing the precise amount. Excess food creates a nitrogen waste problem that can spill outside fish enclosures. Cook claims its salmon grow from egg to 10 to 12 pounds in 3 years.
So there's a high level of energy and interest in developing what we're calling precision aquaculture, which is a new space in aquaculture that looks to make better farms of the future.
But even with the technological innovations, including a reduction in the amount of fish in the fish meal, many industry researchers believe the numbers for fish farming fall well short of sustainability.
And then you have fish, high quality fish, that are fed with other fish. And the notion that aquaculture can contribute to food security anywhere is an illusion, is an error.
That may be the case for finfish farming, but shellfish and seaweed aquaculture is another matter entirely. Oysters, clams, and mussels are, after all, water filters, and seaweed is a CO2 sink. At the University of New Hampshire, they are testing the notion of farming sugar kelp, mussels, and steelhead trout together. The hope is all three species will mutually benefit, and the farming will be more ecologically balanced. It's very different from an intense commercial salmon monoculture.
There are serious sustainability concerns for many of them, but many kinds of aquaculture, like for mussels or oysters, can be expanded dramatically.
But May Limpinski of Rutgers believes it is important not to overlook the potentially limitless bounty of well-managed, sustainable wild fisheries.
There's enormous potential to feed more people based on rebuilt ocean populations.
So what is the potential for aquaculture? Is it really a way to feed the world, or is it just another way to put stress on our beleaguered oceans? For more on this, I'm joined by an industry veteran. Andrew Lively is with Cook Aquaculture. That's a big player. And he's also with the Maine Aquaculture Association. Andrew, good to have you with us here.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is a 35-year-old industry.
Beautiful evening, sunny.
Does it
sunny
get better
weather.
than this? I don't think so.
Great sense.
Yeah.
Your viewers don't know what it smells like here.
Yeah, we got that too. New England at its finest.
It is.
So tell us about your industry. 35 years old, it's come a long way. Tell us about, I think there are some misconceptions about fish farming.
Absolutely. And one of the misconceptions is what we do and how we do things. And we really need to do a better job of explaining how we do what and why we do things. The industry started out as a way to reduce the amount of salmon that people were illegally catching from our rivers. The salmon fishery in Massachusetts and Maine ended in 1948. And what we tried to do was to stop people from illegally catching fish from the rivers and streams the few remaining fish that we had. So we started by raising fish in our water. So our fish have been here for thousands of years. They're indigenous species to our waters, and we started raising fish in our oceans off the east coast of North America. It worked out, and we started to grow the industry. There were some challenges, there were some issues going along. I'm sure your chef might have burnt a pot roast going along, but make improvements and make some changes and adjust how you do things so that you can grow and expand. To the point now where we are able to operate off the coast of North America here in a way that is able to provide fresh seafood within 48 hours out of the water to the local marketplace. Some things are better with age, fish isn't one of them, so we can get fresh fish quickly into the marketplace here in Gloucester.
Okay, the claim that you hear sometimes is this is part of the answer to feed the world.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
It's part of the answer, I would say, yes. You know, earlier you were asking about salmon. There's different types of aquaculture out there, and you mentioned it in your piece as well. We're doing a lot of work raising mussels and kelp and oysters in Maine. There's work being done in the Mediterranean, raising sea bream and sea bass. So there's aquaculture as a way of cultivating a healthy protein is a way to increase the availability of that protein for the world. We're still, with properly managed fisheries, we're still going to have a traditional fishing sector. As you correctly point out, it's being managed quite well here in America and other places around the world, with pressure from the people that have the money to buy it, is going to encourage people to manage their fisheries well as also.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the ratio of fish in to fish out. Yep. I hear all kinds of numbers. Some people would say 4 pounds to get 1 pound, which doesn't sound like a great equation. It doesn't sound sustainable. It also doesn't sound like you can run a very good business doing that.
Absolutely.
I know the industry has progressed quite a bit on creating feed that has different ratios in it. What is the current ratio of fish in to salmon out?
Yeah. So the FIFO, fish in, fish out number is 0.6 to 1. So we need 0.6 pounds of fish meal and fish oil to produce 1 pound of Atlantic salmon. Now, that is a number that's a universally accepted calculation. That doesn't mean that that takes the total amount of the fish that we're taking out of the sea, the portion of that fish that we're using for our feed, and then that's going into the fish. So we're not putting 0.6 pounds of feed, fish meal and fish oil in our feed, but we're able to supplement our feed with other plant-based. So the animals, like human beings, are not ingredient. They don't necessarily have to be the same the ingredients. We don't need to get our fat from caribou. We can get our fat from an avocado. The same thing holds true for a salmon. We can give them the fats and the proteins that they need from other plant-based sources, and that's allowed us to reduce the amount of fish meal and fish oil that we need to produce our fish.
So just to be clear, you say 0.6 fish meal. How much fish goes into that fish meal, though? In other words, what's the true wild-caught fish feed ratio to the salmon that comes out?
That's right. So that's the calculation that we use. It's 0.6 to 1, and that is the total weight of the fish that's caught, the anchovies that are caught. That's their total weight, and to the total weight of the usable salmon that we consume. That's how the calculation works.
Okay. So you actually get more salmon out than you put in the way of anchovies, the way this is coming.
That's right.
Okay. I'd never heard that before. That seems like quite a development.
It is a development. It's, and as Paul mentioned earlier, it's probably been about 15 years that has happened, and it's something that we continuously are trying to improve. That is a number that has been going down for a number of years. I would say in the last 15 years it's gone down significantly, and we continue to invest heavily in research to find more ways to reduce that number.
In the early days, there were concerns about elevated levels of PCBs among these fish because essentially all those fish that were gathered up kind of concentrated the chemical, carcinogen,
right.
And it was reflected, of course, in the finished product. Has that changed?
Absolutely, and part of that is dealing with having more of a plant-based diet. Has dealt with that. Also, I would suggest that some of those early stories weren't in fact factual, that those numbers were elevated, but also increasing the amount of plant material for food has helped with that, and also the way that we use the fish that we're harvesting has reduced those numbers as well. But in fairness, the numbers were never actually a problem. We are an industry that's 30 plus odd years old. Atlantic salmon is the number one fin fish consumed in America. It's widely consumed around Europe. It's widely consumed in other parts of the world. It's produced in the ends of the planet in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. It's been going on for a long, long time, and there's no evidence to indicate there's any issue with consuming Atlantic salmon.
Let's talk a little bit about the greater environmental concerns. Certainly nitrogen is a concern in the water, the overall water quality, but the other issue which comes up quite a bit is the escapees. These are salmon which in some cases are not native to particular waters. There was an escape in 2017 involving your company in the Pacific Northwest involving Atlantic salmon in the Pacific, and that means that you have a species that is not native all of a sudden released. To what extent is that a problem, and how have you addressed it?
Well, it's a problem because you don't want to have your salmon escape from your business. That's money swimming away. So it's not something that you want to do. So we definitely invest a lot in the containment system that we have with our fish. We've also done a lot of work in being able to track our fish. So in Maine, we have a DNA traceability program so that we know the DNA of all of our fish that we put in the water, and we know that if should they be found to have escaped, we will know what site it comes from. The other reality is that we, the settlers, whatever you want to call us, have been trying to introduce salmon into our waters for a long, long time. Again, the fishery ended in 1948. We've been trying to introduce fish in our water since the 1890s. We've known the populations have gone down. And we've tried to introduce Atlantic salmon into the population to try to rebuild that, and it doesn't work. So the fish that were released into the wild in some of our rejuvenation programs, the fact of the matter is they're an anadromous fish. They have dams, they have barriers, and that's why their population has gone down. So the concern is something that we take very seriously. We are actively working to help rebuild wild salmon populations. We have veterinarians and scientists and people that know Atlantic salmon better than anybody, and we're actively working to help rebuild some salmon populations, and we're continuing to work to make sure that we don't lose any fish.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are at Maritime Gloucester, a historic place, and I want to give you a quick tour of Gloucester Harbor. Take a look at that. Off in the distance there, that is the former Tar and Wanson copper paint factory. That copper paint was a crucial technological innovation in the 19th century, which made barnacles less likely to grow on vessels and made them more efficient and go faster. And as we pan around, we come around to Maritime Gloucester, a historic place in its own right. In the heydays, there were hundreds of sailing and fishing vessels in this port, and this was the Burnham Brothers Marine Railway, which you're about to see. It's underneath some high tide water right now. But in 1849, they built a steam railway to haul ships out of the water, to reseal them, scrape off the barnacles, and get them back to work as quickly as possible. It's one of the earliest steam-powered marine railways in the nation, and it's a beautiful and historic place. And today it's a wonderful museum that spends a lot of time educating young people STEM issues surrounding the oceans and fisheries, and they do a lot of good work here at Gloucester. And if you're ever in Gloucester, you should pay them a visit for sure. And now the moment I have been waiting for. It is soon time to eat some of the creative culinary offerings of a James Beard chef who thinks a lot about where seafood comes from, how it was caught, and whether it has a sustainable population. Everything Danielle Leone is cooking for us tonight was bought and prepared with that in mind. But before we get into details and a little bit of eating, let me take you on a morning of sustainable shopping with Danielle. I've never gone shopping with a chef before. This is kind of exciting. So we're starting at Whole Foods. Why is Whole Foods a good place when you're thinking about sustainability and traceability?
They do a really good job with sourcing and making sure the things that they have on the shelves or in the case are actually sustainable. Everything here has a label for you, so it makes it really easy to buy good fish. You notice there's little tags at the top of the signs, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they have ratings of green or yellow. It's like a stoplight system. Green is a go, yellow is okay, and red is no. But nothing is red here, so anything here is okay.
Do you feel okay buying yellow stuff, or do you stick to the green, or?
Well, I will buy yellow or green. I try to buy green, but today what has caught my eye is a yellow fish because it's local.
Ah, show me. What are you looking at?
It's a monkfish fillet. It has such a beautiful texture.
Yeah.
It's so delicious. It'll hold up if you grill it or saute it or put it in like a soup or a stew.
All right. Well, let's buy some monkfish.
All right.
All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Well, I think we had a good start at Whole Foods, but there's not a Whole Foods near everyone.
True.
So why don't we just try the closest market to where we are in Gloucester?
Yeah, I like that idea.
Market basket.
Yeah.
Let's see what's in there. All right, this fish counter looks a little bit different. I can tell right away we're not going to have as much information at our fingertips, are we?
Yeah, it's not so obvious what choice we should make. If it comes from the U.S., it's one of the better choices because we have great standards. And then farm-raised trout from Idaho is a really good option, and they're tasty.
Why don't we get one of those then?
Yeah.
We're really cooking up quite a feast. But, you know, I do wonder about making a choice when it's not fresh, when it's in a can. What do you do about that?
You know, I think canned fish is a really good option, and people overlook it.
Wow, walk me through this. This makes the fish counter look easy by comparison, right?
It does, doesn't
How
it?
do I know what to buy?
Okay, I want to make sure that it's certified sustainable, MSC certified. Also, we want to see if it is individually caught by a pole and a line, and that will be written on the can.
If you are lucky enough to have a local fishmonger, that could be a great option, right?
It can. I mean, it's local and it might be sustainable.
Turner's Seafood in Gloucester. You can bet this is a lot of local fare here. And if it's local, can we presume it to be sustainable around here?
Yes. We have one of the highest regulated fisheries on the planet. So everything that's caught here is recorded. There are quotas that they are, allowed to catch so much, and once those quotas are hit, that fish is no longer allowed to be caught. But everything here has obviously been highly regulated under government regulations. So yes, absolutely sustainable. Right now we have the local gray sole. This is local caught scrod haddock. You can absolutely eat those, feel free, and enjoy them.
So I guess the obvious lesson here is if you want to eat locally, traceably, sustainably, buy locally.
Yeah, I mean, these people are close to the waters and they know how the fish are managed. It's our best bet.
So that was fun, but I think what's going to be even more fun is seeing how you turn this into a feast. What is your plan?
I want to have something fried. I think I want something stewed. I think I want to steam those mussels in something like tangy and fruity. I want a little bit of everything.
It's going to be a feast.
It's going to be awesome.
Awesome indeed. You're delivering, Danielle. You know, I think our eyes were a little bigger than our stomachs on this mission, right? We got a little carried away.
We bought everything that was sustainable, right?
We bought everything that was, yeah. And it looks, my gosh, this looks fabulous. So walk us through what you're cooking here.
Yeah, well, right now we have a pasta sauce ready, and it has olives and canned tomatoes and zucchini, and that's for the canned tuna that we bought.
Okay,
so this is a nice, easy canned meal I thought people would enjoy. And then here, this is a potato salad, but it's made with fresh cherries and parsley, and this is the beautiful fish that we got from Turner's.
Yes.
And so here, I thought it'd be nice just to top it.
Oh
so
my God,
I think people usually fry this often, and I like that we can just enjoy this whole, like in the chunk, as a salad, even cool, you know?
Right.
And then I'm working on some couscous and a fried fish.
Well, let me see over here.
You want to
Let's
see
see
this?
the fried fish, yeah.
This is the trout that we picked up.
Wow, wow.
We got this from the market basket.
Yeah.
This is our U.S.
That's
farm trout.
farmed U.S. trout.
That's right.
I believe this is a scrod haddock.
That's right, the scrod haddock.
And this is the tuna.
That's right.
And in each case, you were very specific about trying to figure out where it came from.
Yes.
It was interesting when we started off at Whole Foods. There was a lot of signage there to tell us what to do. But you know, it is important. Whole Foods is not for everybody's budget or everybody's geography.
Right.
So you have to be kind of sleuthy and a little bit of a detective when you go to some markets. But then when we went to the fishmonger, he was like Jim Turner. He was an encyclopedia of fish. It was fascinating, right?
He was a wealth of knowledge, right? And it was different no matter where we went. It was a different experience. But we always had the same questions, right? Where did it come from? How was it fished? Because that really determines if it's sustainable. And that's how we got all these beautiful things on our plates tonight.
All right, you're going to taunt me, or can I do a little tasting?
Do you want to taste
yeah,
it?
I would love a little
tasting. Oh my
tasting.
gosh.
Yeah,
do you want to taste the pasta sauce? Do you want to taste
I'm
the
doing
salad?
the feast. I'm in for a penny, right?
Okay, I actually had a spoon ready for you.
Excellent.
Do you want to just dig in as
you
see fit, right?
Fabulous. This looks
Here's
good.
some olives and red sauce. It's a little hot.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I
The
like
olives,
the
the tomatoes, the garlic.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna go great with tuna.
Yep.
And
tuna in the can too.
Yeah, we're just. This is almost done, and when it's done, I'm just gonna put that tuna right on top and let it warm a bit.
All right, well, keep doing what you're doing there.
Okay. Now this, I think, if you go in on this one, I recommend some of the fish, a cherry, and the peanuts for sure.
Okay, so
try to get a cherry. Scrod haddock.
Tell me about you like to cook with fruit a lot, don't you?
Yeah, I've been cooking Jamaican food for over a decade in Arizona, so I think fruit all the time when I think dinner.
All right, so this is scrod haddock, and that's plentiful in these waters. We know where it comes from, sustainable in every way, and local.
Local,
and here we go. Let's give it a try. Oh wow, really good.
It's nice. You like
the combination of the fish, the nuts, and the cherries. I never would have put that together, but that's why I don't cook very well. You just have to have a certain brain for that. That's a great mix of flavors. Really delicious. And the fish is just so flaky and delicate. I can see why this is the most popular fish in New England.
Isn't it?
Right?
Like melts in your mouth. It's very tender. It cooks very quickly, so it makes for a very fast meal. It has a lot of flavor in it too. And the cherries are in season. That's how I decided on them. And that's really what guides me.
Right.
What's in season.
So you stick with what's in season, what's local in every respect.
I
not
try
just the fish.
to, right? But if you can't, that's when I go to the canned fish.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Well, in the canned fish, you made an interesting point that it didn't really occur to me. I said, well, canned fish isn't fresh. Maybe that's not true. Explain that.
Exactly, that's the misconception. But when they go out to fish, by the time that fish comes out of the water, it's in a can the same day. I mean, it's preserved, it's locked in. And so you have this beautiful, like pristine fish ready and waiting for you on the shelf. So you find something pull in line or MSC certified, and you have a fresh fish that's sustainable guaranteed.
So the freshness is kind of sealed up, and there it is for you. So the challenge of this are not insignificant. When we went to the market basket, the assistant manager at the fish counter was a bit frustrated, frankly. He wished he could know more about where the fish comes from. He knows regions, but he doesn't know really how it was caught, or the traceability is kind of vague. But what was interesting to me is he said more and more people are asking those questions. What do you think is happening?
I think people are aware that there's an ocean issue. I think people are aware that there's something going on with fish, and they're curious. And it's a message that we keep repeating, and it's starting to resonate within everybody's community, right? And so they're coming to the fish counter, and yeah, it all looks delicious, but like really what's happening with this fish? Because we all want our local communities like here to thrive and prosper. We want to have healthy oceans. We all know, we all love to go to the beach even. We want these things to be around. And so now we know, in a way, if we understand where it comes from and how it's fished, we might be able to just do our small part.
It would be nice if he had that information at his fingertips, wouldn't it? We got to make that possible for somebody who's working at a fish counter to know what he's selling, right?
I think everybody should know what they're selling.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's an opaque industry. Are you going to make me, you taunt me with this one? I'm going to try the trout.
Oh my goodness.
This is the Idaho farm-raised trout.
Yeah.
And we know it's sustainable because it's U.S. for one thing.
It's U.S.
Right?
And this is a crispy fried fish with escovitch. I'm not sure if we have a fork for you, but let's see.
I could eat it with a spoon.
Could you eat it with a spoon?
Yeah, I could do that.
Oh, actually, I do have a fork for you.
All right, excellent.
Perfect.
All right, so what do I do?
It's fried. It does have a bone, obviously. It's a whole fish, so be careful with it.
I don't want to mess it up.
Oh,
here. Why don't you start it for me?
Okay.
Why don't you cut off a little piece for me?
Let the chef. Let me help you.
It's too beautiful to mess up, and I'll make a mess of it. I really will. All right, so what did you do on this one?
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a small bite. This is a crispy fried trout. Can I give you something spicy? Is that too crazy?
I think we're getting taps over there at the Coast Guard station. It's
Okay, this is a spicy bite.
All right.
Crispy fried fish, Jamaican style escovitch with pickled peppers.
That's got some heat on there.
Pickled carrots, onions.
Oh, I like what you did there.
So what I love about this is you just throw it in the fry pan, and then you take some vegetables with some vinegar. You do? You want more?
Here, get me I don't want, kind of a...
That's it. Be careful of the bones, though.
I'm probably going to choke
And you're
going to
eat another spicy one?
Oh, yeah.
You're a good eater.
Oh, yeah.
I like that you try everything.
Absolutely.
This is my favorite way to eat a fish because there's no waste. You have the whole fish, right? You could even save the frame later if you want to make a little stock out of it or something.
So what's the lesson here for the average person who likes to eat a little fish every now and then?
I say no matter where you're shopping, in your community or in the world, there is always a sustainable fish waiting for you.
Really?
Yeah. From canned fish, everybody has canned fish on the shelf, right? And everybody will have a fish in the case. So between those options, you're going to find something sustainable. Just know where it's coming from. In the U.S., we have really well-managed waters, so you have a really great chance of having a sustainable fish here in the U.S.
It would be nice if we could trace every one of them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we should know where our food comes from. We deserve to know these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Danielle Leone, I think our ambitious shopping campaign is pleasing the crew right now. They're all kind of looking and wondering, oh, that sandwich we got on the catering table? No, we're coming over here. So
we're all asking for samples. But
thank you so much for really teaching me a ton about how to shop and cook sustainably and enjoy seafood. Thank you so much.
Thanks for shopping and eating with me.
Yeah, it was fun.
All
right,
right,
well,
Miles.
we've gotten a lot of great questions all evening, and a few of them are actually on camera. We have a quick one right now from David Chong.
In landlocked Indiana, there's a new producer who started growing genetically modified salmon far from any ocean or river. Will we see more of our fish grown this way in the future?
All right, that's the question we're going to put to Paul Greenberg because he knows all this stuff. Fishing farmed fish on land. Sounds like a contradiction in terms.
Yes.
Why would you do that in the first place? And is that something that is real?
So yes, it is real. People are doing it. You would do it mostly to kind of bring farmed fish out of contact with wild fish so that there would be no disease transmission from farmed fish to wild fish. There'd be no sea lice incidences. There'd be no water pollution. So conceivably, it's a good idea. Will it persist? One thing that has always happened to me as a reporter on fisheries in the oceans, every couple of years I get an email from a company saying, we've got an amazing land-based aquaculture operation. It's really great. You should come see us. By the time I get to the email 6 months later, I email them back and I get a bounce out of business.
Because so this is a tough business.
It's tough business. And you know, the caller also was talking about genetically modified fish, and that's what they're doing. AquaBounty is doing that in Indiana.
Which you wouldn't want to put in the open ocean because they do escape, and that could be a problem.
You certainly wouldn't want to put them in the open ocean. And you know, one of the arguments of genetically modified fish is that, well, we make it grow that much faster, so potentially, if we're growing it on land where energy inputs are a factor, if we could get it through that system really much more quickly, then maybe it would work.
All right, another question on the fish farming front. Kelly from New York is asking this one. Does fish farming add to climate change? That's a tough one, huh?
Well, you know, it is a tough one. It all depends on what's happening to these fish when we're farming them. If we're taking all of this wild fish and we're feeding it to farmed fish, potentially we're pulling those wild fish out of the environment where they could be feeding a whole food chain of things. Animals sequester carbon, right? That's what animals are, is, you know, an aggregation of carbon. So if you're moving that out of the food chain and putting it to a farm, you're potentially simplifying the food chain, and to my mind, maybe not doing good a job as nature could do.
All right, we have another on-camera question.
Yes.
Let's roll it.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schenk. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a filmmaker and a kind of harried working mom. And what I'm wondering is, what can a regular person like myself do to make the situation better?
Yeah, I think we all have that experience. You know,
Yep.
What do we do?
Well, I mean, as we've been talking about throughout the show, making the right choices as consumers is really important. So I think, you know, looking at things like anchovies, eating anchovies directly instead of using them for aquaculture, focusing on mussels, clams, oysters, looking at fisheries that are well managed. You are, in effect, voting with your fork. So I think continuing that practice as consumers is a really good idea. But I also think that we are the eyes and the ears of the waterfront. Those of us who live on the waterfront need to be guardians of the waterfront. So if we see development going on, if we see our local community has not got its septic systems in order, all those kinds of things, we need to be more active citizens in protecting our waterfront.
All right, here's one from Pam Brooks. How does the shrimp industry play into this conversation?
Well, the shrimp industry is huge. I mean, as I say, it's the most consumed seafood in America. Tons and tons of shrimp that we eat. It's mostly farmed. It's mostly coming to us from Asia and South America, often in not ideal working conditions. So It's a big part of it. Personally, I say if you're reaching for a shrimp cocktail, have oyster on the half shell instead.
Ah, okay, that's a good tip. All right. While you cough, let's listen to one more question.
I'm Justin Shine. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm interested in the issue of overfishing of our natural fisheries, and would love to know if aquaculture and farm fishing might be an answer to help alleviate that problem.
This is a theme that's kind of woven through the whole broadcast. This idea of, does aquaculture help or hurt fisheries? Where do you come down on this one?
I don't think it really necessarily helps them. I mean, earlier a guest was talking about how aquaculture companies are trying to help restore wild Atlantic salmon fisheries. But to this day, wild Atlantic salmon are listed as endangered species on the East Coast. Has that improved in the course of the last 50 years? No. What it's done is made more people excited about eating salmon of every kind, whether it's wild or farmed. No, improving wild fisheries is about improving the management, but it's also about, really saving our natural environment, removing those dams from those rivers that are blocking salmon from going upstream, stopping ocean pollution, really mitigating climate change. That's really the solution for building better wild fisheries.
Tom Irvin has a question. What challenges are created to water quality by concentrating this aquaculture?
It's certainly an issue. Fish in an open ocean aquaculture operation are pooping in the water. It can be mitigated if you put aquaculture operations in areas with deeper waters and swifter currents. Then it doesn't aggregate as much. There's a big move to want to move aquaculture entirely offshore. The old adage from the Clean Water Act days, the solution to pollution is dilution, applies here. And so there is some thought of moving aquaculture further offshore, but it is an issue and it can cause problems.
When you look at all the problems we've been talking about this last hour plus, climate change, overfishing, coastal pollution, it would be very easy to be very pessimistic about the future of the oceans. Where do you come down on that?
Well, look at how many fish we take out of the sea right now, 80 to 90 million metric tons. That's the equivalent of the human weight of China taken out of the ocean every year. And you could think, oh my God, what a horrible destruction, raping and pillaging of the ocean. On the other hand, every single year, the ocean produces 80 to 90 million metric tons. So many times people say to me, oh, you write about the ocean. Oh, it's dead. The ocean is so far from dead. It is producing the equivalent of the human weight of China for our food every single year. So it's very much alive. It is problematic. There are lots of issues going on, but this is a living, breathing system. We don't eat from the wild in any other capacity in any food system. So the fact that we have a wild food system is amazing.
All right, that's a good place to end it. That makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Paul Greenberg, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Miles.
For Tipping Point. And thanks to all of our guests as well. What a great ongoing conversation we had. And I feel like we really hit the top of the iceberg. Thanks to all of you as well for being a part of Tipping Point Fisheries on the Brink. From Gloucester, Massachusetts, I'm Miles O'Brien.
Funding for this program is provided by